Hey, I'm here with Peter Gregory from First Choice Business Brokers, and we're talking about what are the intangible assets within a business that ultimately contribute to the business's value and marketability. So, love your first take on this, Peter.
Yes, thanks, Len. Yeah, we actually get into that specifically during the valuation point. We call it a market price analysis that we do for the owner, and we'll work from their tax records and their P&Ls and some other pieces of information. Maybe they can support us with balance sheet. In many cases, 50% of the time, the businesses don't really have too many assets that are key to the success of the business that aren't really used there. An exception to that would be one that's esports right now. That's all computers and I, for instance, have to talk to them. You want to take a little look at maybe depreciation, the concept of depreciation. And so I'm looking at this room full of the fastest computers you can possibly get for esports. It's this up and coming market that they're actually on the, I'd say, bleeding edge of. They're actually figuring out what the market is for esports. And so I needed to ask them, having experience we all have with having to update our computers from time to time, and find out about how do they update these computers? Is that going to be every 2 or 3 years? They're going to have to do a whole new outlay. And in that case, it ended up being that they just change out the graphics cards. The rest of it seems to be okay in that industry. So that's an intangible that I can bring to a buyer. I mean, once we get underway, it's all about buyer ease, what the typical buyer may be asking. And then we have certain probably semi-obvious things as intangibles. So we first go through, we look at purely cash flow kind of issues, things like that, trending upward, downward. That's a big intangible that we bring out. Full competency of their employees. Have they been receiving training of all kinds? There's a lot of different aspects of compliance these days, training that we have. Management in place, long-term employees that will stay with the company. There's how competitive the industry is. For instance, you would think anybody could go out and start an esports facility, but the barrier to entry is pretty high because the obvious part is a facility and equipment and let's say some personnel that are good with all age levels. But it all comes down to you start understanding the industries, and they're very good with getting their clients. It's a sophisticated client that has a lot of questions, and there are mainly school systems that actually are recognizing this as an after school, actual sport with transport there and everything else. So the real barrier to entry is that business side of it in this case. So we deal with a handful of intangibles and it's sliding bars, a set of slide bars on this to be able to converse with a buyer. Yeah.
Yeah, so that matches up pretty well with my thoughts. From some of the research I've seen, about 80% of the value of a company is actually ascribed to intangible assets. It's not the things that you can really see from the outside, right? And we think about them in four big categories, call them the four C's. So structural capital, which is, are the processes documented? Does the business owner understand the metrics that are in place, right? What really drives the business? The customer capital. So this is all about, do you have a diverse customer base, right? Or do you have all your revenue from two or three customers, which is pretty risky, right? Do you have recurring or predictable revenue? That's another big piece that I know drives valuation. And then we talk about social capital. You've touched on this. So, is there a strong culture within the company? Can it run without the owner? That's a big one. And then human capital as well, right? Do you have experienced, specialized employees? Do they have some experience, or maybe are they on the other end and everybody's going to retire in a couple of years, right? Which could be a problem. So all those come into play, and I think we're aligned that there's a lot of things that you wouldn't see from the outside that drive ultimate marketability and value.
Yeah, that's right. And hopefully we don't come across them with a business or owner where they didn't recognize some of these parts. Hopefully they're working on all these, again, like slide bars. You can't be perfect. And I loved your 80% rule. I started out doing valuations, 80% science, 20% art, 20% science flows.
Awesome. Well, appreciate your input.